I know he's told us, well, just don't think about Stalin. Don't think about Mao Zedong. Don't think about those extreme examples.
The word propaganda sets off alarm bells. We think of Hitler, we think of Stalin. Don't.
If you're talking about messages that are only going to reach people who voluntarily buy the ticket, then you have to create works of art that people want to buy, people want to see and hear and listen to. You've got to get in there and compete with Spider-Man and Batman and everyone else at the box office.
My view is that museums should take a leaf out of the book of religions. If I was a museum curator, I would make a room for love, a room for generosity, a room, all works of art are talking to us about things. And if we were able to arrange spaces where we could come across works, where we would be told, use these works of art to cement these ideas in your mind, we would get a lot more out of art.
Alain de Botton.
So I apologize if my first response was a bit lengthy, but now I can pretty rapidly proceed through this because the same issues are coming up again and again. Are you going to force school children to attend these museums with these exhibitions devoted to these ideals that you personally believe in? Your view, Alain de Botton's view of love and human decency and these things you want to preach.
If I was a museum curator, I would make a room for love.
Who chose you? Who elected you to be museum curator? There's a very strange elitist aspect to this. And of course, the religions of the world are only to a very limited extent grassroots and responding to their adherents. But ultimately they do. Ultimately, they're answerable to their donors and their parishioners. And the Communist Party is not. Joseph Stalin is not. And worryingly, even in a country like Canada with our modestly dysfunctional form of parliamentary democracy, Parliament decides to make a museum of human rights. Parliament decides to make a museum about Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, Native Americans, for lack of a better term. Who decides the message of that museum? And who wants to see it? Who wants to pay $40 to come and see it? Well, when you actually look at the numbers, most museums, in order to have the attendance that they boast of, they actually do rely on forcing school groups of children to come and see those exhibitions at the museum. And that in itself really constrains the messages that they can deliver. Now, the other justification for a museum's budget has to do with actually caring for the objects, the artifacts, the archaeological side of museology, the conservation, preservation, even archival side of museology, that they're caring for items of some kind of historical and cultural value. That's not considered here. But let me tell you something. I've dealt with museum budgets. They are also in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The amount of money that governments pour into museums for very dubious public benefits, very dubious outcomes, it's shock-inducing. It's eye-watering. The museum exhibits, in many ways, are like blockbuster movies, but that only a handful of people ever go to see. So it's a very strange thing that in most modern Western parliamentary societies, we've just come to accept this, that there's a tiny elite of people in London, England, and nobody elected them, and nobody scrutinizes them. And they're given enormous quantities of taxpayers' money to tell us what great art is, to tell us what culture is, to tell us what even theater is, and more worryingly, to give us powerful propaganda messages, mostly about the history of World War II. I hope now, with the 100th anniversary, we're getting some museology about World War I. The last time I went to the Canadian War Museum, and I went to the British War Museum in England, most of those museums are almost totally focused on World War II. You're not going to get a lot of deep examination of England's role in unpopular wars in Africa. You're not going to get soul-searching about the history of the British slave trade or this kind of thing. Why? Because these museums do serve a propaganda purpose. And there's nothing grassroots, there's nothing answerable to the public about it. So I don't know why he has this faith, for lack of a better word, that the secularization of propaganda in elite forms, in museums and art institutions, that this could transform society. I think in order to believe that, again, I know he's told us, well, just don't think about Stalin. Don't think about Mao Zedong. Don't think about those extreme examples. Who do you think this message would possibly reach? If you're talking about messages that are only going to reach people who voluntarily buy the ticket, then you have to create works of art that people want to buy, people want to see and hear and listen to. You've got to get in there and compete with Spider-Man and Batman and everyone else at the box office. And I, for my part, as an atheist, as a nihilist, as a vegan, I do want to compete. I want to compete with Curious George. I want to compete with all the children's books. I want to compete with Peppa Pig. I want to compete with Mickey Mouse. But I precisely see that as a form of artistic free market competition and not as propaganda. And what that leaves you is a very, very limited margin to be didactic. Because if it's a little bit too didactic, then you start to resemble compulsory education. And for the purposes of this discussion, the most important part there is questioning what makes it compulsory.
What do organized religions do? They group together. They form institutions. And that has all sorts of advantages. First of all, scale, might. The Catholic Church pulled in $97 billion last year, according to the Wall Street Journal. So religions are the foremost example of an institution that is fighting for the things of the mind. Now, we may not agree with what religions are trying to teach us, but we can admire the institutional way in which they're doing it. Books alone, books written by lone individuals, are not going to change anything.
So in part here, again, we have a repetition of the same fundamental economic and political naivete that we heard before. Oh, you envy the Catholic Church for collecting tens of millions of dollars. What would be the basis for people donating tens of millions of dollars to you or to your imaginary cause, your imaginary foundation? It's very difficult to make a case for fundraising for any of these things you're proposing. But moreover, one of the fundamental things that's changed in the 21st century is simply the ease of disseminating ideas. I could understand his pessimism about people publishing a book. He says, when has publishing a book ever made a difference? When has a lone person publishing a book ever made a difference? Every day of my life. I mean, in the 21st century, to say this.
Books alone, books written by lone individuals, are not going to change anything.
Now, I mean, the 17th century, 16th, I don't know how far back we'd have to go. But for most of the history of civilization, even without having a printing press. Sorry, I did history of Southeast Asia, where it was all handwritten manuscripts using a metal stylus to scrape into palm leaf manuscripts. But still, new ideas and stories spread across the continent like wildfire. No, so writing a book can change the world. And I think what's worth facing up to is the saddening extent to which commercial mass media entertainment, like Batman and Spider-Man and Curious George and Peppa Pig, those are books that change the world. Harry Potter. One woman sitting alone wrote this book and had this enormous impact. And yeah, if you want to take it that far, I totally despise Karl Marx, but what are you going to tell me? That Karl Marx didn't change the world by publishing a book? How about you compare his publishing books to everything else he did in his life? I think you can look at the organization of mass groups of people, mass organizations, hundreds of people or thousands of people within the life of Karl Marx and other people's lives, and say, oh, wow, you did all this work organizing this event or organizing these people, even if you had a demonstration that lasted a day or something. 10 years later, where is the trace of it? What influence did it have on planet Earth? The types of impact you can possibly have through anything other than publishing a book seems to me very easy to be cynical about. But we live in a world in the 21st century when it's more difficult to make money out of book publishing than ever. But to write ideas that matter to people and change the world, that's very easy to do. And we don't need tens of millions of dollars to do it. Hey, it'd be great. If you got $10,000 for an advertising budget, get a literary agent, promote your ideas, great. It can help. But as never before, we're unencumbered from needing just the infrastructure of an organization like the Catholic Church. And again, on what basis does the Catholic Church collect tens of millions of dollars? Lies, deception, threats, and oppression. I don't want to be part of a movement based on a lie. I don't want to collect donations from people with phony promises of liberation or political outcomes I can't deliver if we're talking about real world stuff. I don't want to be part of a religion like modern Buddhism that promises people things that, promises them health benefits from meditation that just don't exist, so on and so forth. I don't want to promise people something as banal as inner peace, and I don't want to promise them they're going to be freed from the chains of capitalism or all the things that seem to motivate people to donate money and then to have very little scrutiny about what's done with the money after they donate it. So if the case is going to be made for large institutions having large sums of money at their disposal, you'd need to be in a situation where millions of people were motivated by one commonly understood objective they all share. Veganism has got that. Atheism doesn't. And to reappropriate his term here, Atheism 2.0, I think an interesting use of the idea of Atheism 2.0 would be switching from an era, 1.0, when we were mostly talking about the critique of religion by atheists and the critique of atheists by religion, and switching on to Atheism 2.0, a period of time when atheists are really engaged in criticizing one another in order to try to find that objective, that clear sense of social change, cultural change, and political change, and then decide on how they're going to achieve it. I think that might be Atheism 2.0, and I'm really eager to get on to Atheism 3.0 because I want to start collecting donations to publish this children's book I'm writing. I'm writing right now a children's book trying to challenge Christmas, trying to provide some kind of meaningful holiday, meaningful mythology, if you like, that's not religious. Secular people can have a meaningful, end of December holiday with their kids. I'm interested in producing that new cultural change to challenge what came before. But guess what? We can do it in a highly decentralized, non-hierarchical, mutually respectful, participatory, transparent, and very low-cost way.
That education, the process of education, particularly higher education, will make us into nobler and better human beings. That's a lovely idea. It's also an idea that we have forgotten. If you went to a top university, let's say you went to Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, and you said, I've come here because I'm in search of morality, guidance, and consolation. I want to know how to live. They would show you the way to the insane asylum. This is simply not what our grandest and best institutes of higher learning are in the business of.
In the United States of America, people go $50,000 into debt to get a university education and more. The opportunity cost, even if you have a fully paid scholarship, of losing 4 years of your life. We already have a crisis in our society of people in the humanities going to university and receiving diplomas that do not in any way open up forms of employment for them. This is a crisis on a massive scale. We did make several videos talking about this at length and doing a book review. There were quantitative studies. There were real dimensions to this that run deep. So in 2018, Alain de Botton looks at this broken higher education system. And it's not broken from the perspective of the professors. It's broken in terms of the service it's providing to the students, and I can say to society as a whole. And enormous quantity of resources is being poured into this higher education system by the government and from the students and from their parents in terms of tuition. And he sees this and he says, oh, this should be more like medieval education. This should be more like communist education. This should be more of a situation we are having inculcated into you moral and ethical values. And as I asked before with the production of art, the production of propaganda, whose moral values? Who elected you? I mean, if you're the rector of this university, if you're the president of this university, if you are, as he fantasizes, the curator for this museum, so your morality now takes on this papal authority. Why? And why would I pay for it? Whether I'm the donor fronting the money, $250 million for you to make this movie, or I'm the viewer, I'm the member of the audience buying my ticket for whatever it is now, $13, $15 to see a movie. Or if I'm the student paying $5,000 maybe $50,000 to get this education. Why am I paying you for it? Why am I paying for you to give me a morality lecture? And maybe this is the greatest irony of all. Because, one of the things that's really touching about a sincere religion like Theravada Buddhism is precisely that the monks are forbidden to touch money, that they're supposed to walk barefoot from town to town giving people morality lectures. And guess what? If you ask people to pay for you to stand there and explain to them that they're an immoral character, that they need to be more upright, people are not going to pay you for this, neither as donors nor as supplicants. And you don't begin from any common sense of belief or objective, which we as vegans have, and you as atheists don't. Say, hey, this is what we all want to accomplish, therefore donate this money to me, and I'm going to produce propaganda to achieve this goal. So again, I think the most unexamined error here on every level, and it comes up again and again and again, it's most visible when talked about economically. But the real underlying error is one of authority. It's one of hierarchy, that all of his fantasies are top-down. They're of enlightened and noble atheists like himself becoming the president of the university, becoming the professor, becoming the museum curator, becoming the person in power who gets to point the finger and act like the Pope and dictate what morality is and what love and the brotherhood of humanity is, and that other people are just going to have to take it. Well, there's a reason why people associate this view of society with Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and maybe to some extent the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. Okay? It's because your fantasy, Alain de Botton, is authoritarian, and we have alternatives. Like right now here on YouTube, where pretty much every day I upload morality lectures. I really do. One of my most popular videos of all time is why you should not drink alcohol. Just me lecturing you on why you shouldn't drink alcohol. But the people who watch my videos don't have to pay me a dime. And they can walk out of the theater anytime. None of them are a captive audience. When people ask, who elected you? Who elected me? The answer is, my audience did. Because what we have here is a transparent, open-ended, participatory model for cooperation, collaboration, and spreading of ideas. And in 2018, it's this format, not reproducing the authoritarian relationships of the Dark Ages, that are winning. Alain de Botton, I understand your aesthetic yearning for some of the trappings of religion, but when you look past the trappings, you have to recognize that the money, authority, and power that religion built up, and why it exhibits those trappings, is all built on a lie.